The Prime Minister has said that there were security flaws. That's basically a bit of an understatement. I went for a walk down the Champs-Élysées on Saturday night, and in all the years I've lived in Paris, I have never seen anything like it. So much damage, shop windows broken, newspaper kiosks in flames. It was just like a war zone. So there is tremendous pressure on the government to come up with some kind of measure to bring all of this to an end. Just a reminder, this has been going on not just on Saturday, but for the past 18 weeks. Saturday was the worst amount of violence that Paris has seen so far, but this is a weekly occurrence in France since the 17th of November. So he is meeting today with Emmanuel Macron. That's in about half an hour, with several other ministers accompanying him, and they're going to make some kind of statement. Emmanuel Macron, speaking on Saturday night after he came back from his skiing holiday early, said that he wanted to hit hard. One of the ideas being bantered about is actually banning protesters from going into the Champs-Élysées at all and making that a no-go zone for protests. But that would also be very difficult. It just might push the protests somewhere else in Paris. So being discussed at the moment in France is what's called an anti-vandal law, and the anti-vandal law has been put together since the Yellow Vest protests began back in November, and is now being discussed by the Constitutional Council, which is the highest ruling body in France. Now, the measures are, you can see them behind me. One is to create a list of people who've been banned from protesting due to violence. The next one is to ban individuals known for committing violence from protesting anymore. Another aspect is requiring vandals and violent protesters to help pay for and fix any damage they cause. And the final one is to forbid protesters from covering their faces. Now, why is that important? Because in many cases they are filmed by CCTV, and CCTV is one way of identifying them. Of course, if they're covering their faces with scarves or hoods, then they can't be identified. The problem is, even if those measures were agreed, which they probably will be, they wouldn't really be enough to change things, I don't think, very much with what happened on Saturday in the Champs-Élysées, where many of the people who were involved in that fighting, that violence, were not called in by the police. A reminder that 80 shops and businesses were vandalised in the Champs-Élysées on Saturday. That's over 600 since the 17th of November. And the Chamber of Commerce has said that the damage caused by the Yellow Vest protests has given a 0.2% dent to the French economy.
And what I think is surprising for so many people watching this, especially from abroad, is that the anti-government movement started 4 months ago. The government has given quite a few concessions so far, some 10 billion euros worth, and yet the protesters are still so angry.
Well, if you look at the figures, the attendance figures for the protests in France, they have gone down a lot since the beginning of the Yellow Vest protest. When you look at it at the beginning of, the 17th of November, the beginning of the movement, 282,000 protesters took to the streets across France. Week 18, which was on Saturday, that had gone down to only 32,300. So many people have said they agree with the measures that the president and the government have announced. I'll give you a few of them. One is a 10 billion euros worth of concessions, including a €100 hike to the minimum wage, a freeze of gas and electricity prices for a year, a freeze on a proposed increase in petrol prices, in diesel and petrol. And so the government has taken some steps to try to quell this. The problem is that they are now faced with a very hardline, anarchic group of protesters who are being followed by what are known in France as black blocs, which are extremely hardline protesters who are against anything to do with the capitalist system. And that's why you see them attacking banks, attacking restaurants that are famous, attacking symbols of the state, fast food restaurants, anything that represents capitalism in France. And the problem for the government is that these people are very difficult to pinpoint, because they take a change of uniform with them. They'll wear a yellow vest for part of the protest, then they'll take it off and commit trouble, then they'll put it back on again. They'll take a change of gloves so they can't be detected by their DNA. It's very hard for the government to be able to drag these people in. And so the problem is that at the end of the day, everyone is protesting about it, and in the middle is the police, who don't want to intervene too much because they don't want to be accused of killing a protester, for example. And when they don't intervene, they're being criticised for not having protected these shops. So the government has got to try to find some kind of equation to satisfy everybody that they've got this position, this protest, this trouble under control. And that's what Emmanuel Macron's going to have to come up with today.
Right. It's a really thorny issue. And of course, it gets very political as well, with the opposition being very critical of the lack of security measures that were seen or perceived to have been seen over the weekend.
Well, it's true. And obviously, some of the opposition parties in France, notably the far left and the far right, and even the right wing, have been jumping on the government, saying that you didn't take enough measures to keep this under control. The problem is, if you they've tried several different things. The first one was to let protesters demonstrate in the Champs-Elysees without any measures. Then we had at the beginning of December these protests where people stormed the Arc de Triomphe and covered it in graffiti and caused trouble. Then they said, okay, well, we will filter people going into the demonstration and not let in the violent protesters. That meant they didn't get into the demonstration in the Champs-Elysees. They went elsewhere to cause trouble. So there's no easy way out of this for the French government. And right in the middle of it is that under the French constitution, everybody has the right to demonstrate, and so they don't want to be seen as going against human rights in France by banning people from their fundamental right, which is to go out and to protest.